In September 2022, beneath a collapsed stone foundation deep in the North Cascades, a forestry worker discovered what search teams had been looking for 9 years. Disturbed earth, a rotting canvas tarp, 2 bodies. A man lay on his back, arms crossed over his chest. Beside him was a woman, curled on her side. It all began in September 2013. 29-year-old David Chen and his girlfriend Sarah Mitchell, 26, decided to spend a long weekend hiking in the North Cascades National Park in Washington State. David worked as a graphic designer for an advertising agency in Seattle. Sarah was a nurse at a children's hospital. They had been together for 4 years and lived in a small apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. They had been talking about getting engaged. David had even looked at rings, though he hadn't told Sarah yet. He'd shown his best friend a photo of the one he was considering, a simple band with a small diamond. He planned to propose sometime that fall, maybe on her birthday in November. They chose a lesser-known trail in the Ross Lake area, on the eastern edge of the park. This section is known among experienced hikers as challenging but rewarding, with steep climbs, dense forest, and spectacular views of the surrounding peaks. David had hiked parts of the Cascades before and was comfortable with difficult terrain. Sarah was athletic and adventurous, though less experienced with multi-day backpacking trips. They planned to cover about 25 miles over 3 days, camping at designated backcountry sites along the route. The trail was moderately marked, with occasional cairns and faded blazes on trees. Park rangers recommended hikers carry detailed maps and GPS devices for this area. On Friday, September 13th, around 10 in the morning, they parked their Honda CR-V at the trailhead parking area near Copper Ridge. There was a small ranger station there, unmanned but with an information board and a trail register. David signed them in, noting their planned route and expected return date of Monday, September 16th. A trail maintenance worker was nearby, clearing brush from the path. He remembered seeing them because they were joking and laughing as they adjusted their packs. Sarah had complained that her boots were already giving her a blister. David had told her they should break in new boots before a long hike. The worker said they seemed happy, prepared, and in good spirits. There were 2 other vehicles in the parking lot. Neither driver recalled seeing David and Sarah, though one hiker passed them on the trail later that afternoon and exchanged brief greetings. David carried most of the heavy gear, the tent, sleeping bags, cooking equipment, and food for 3 days. Sarah had a lighter pack with clothes, a water filtration system, and a first aid kit. They walked at a steady pace, stopping occasionally to take photos and drink water. Sarah last posted to Instagram at 3:30 in the afternoon. The photo showed David standing at an overlook, mountains in the background, smiling. The caption read, "Day 1 of 3. Already worth it." The location tag showed they were near Copper Ridge Lookout, about 8 miles from the trailhead. David texted his roommate at 6:15 that evening. The message was brief. "Made camp, signal weak, see you Monday." After that, there was no further communication. Both phones stopped responding around 7:00 p.m. The signal disappeared in an area known as Silvertip Basin, a remote valley surrounded by steep ridges at about 6,500 feet elevation. The next day, Saturday, David's roommate didn't think anything of the silence. He knew they were in a remote area with poor cell coverage. By Sunday evening, he started to feel uneasy, but told himself they'd be back the next day as planned. Monday came and went. No David, no Sarah. On Tuesday morning, David's roommate drove to the trailhead. The Honda was still there, covered in morning dew, undisturbed. He looked inside through the windows. Sarah's purse was visible on the back seat. David's work laptop was in the trunk. He called the park rangers immediately. The search began that afternoon. A team of park rangers and volunteers started from the trailhead, following the route David had noted in the trail register. They checked the first designated campsite, 6 miles in. There were signs someone had camped there recently. A fire ring with cold ashes, trampled grass, but nothing definitively linked it to David and Sarah. They continued to the second site, another 4 miles up the trail. Nothing. By nightfall, they had covered 12 miles and found no trace of the couple. The next day, the search expanded. Helicopters flew over the area. Search and rescue teams with dogs were brought in from neighboring counties. The dogs picked up a scent from items in the car, a jacket of Sarah's, a hat of David's, and led handlers along the main trail. About 10 miles from the trailhead, near a steep section called Devil's Staircase, the trail went cold. The dogs lost the scent near a rockslide area where the path became treacherous. Rangers checked all marked campsites within a 15-mile radius. They also began searching off-trail, checking hidden valleys, creek beds, and caves. The North Cascades are vast and unforgiving. Dense forests, sudden cliffs, fast-moving streams swollen with late summer snowmelt. It's easy to get lost. Easier still to get hurt. The weather during those days had been variable. Friday and Saturday were clear and mild, with temperatures in the low 60s. But Sunday night brought unexpected storms, lightning, heavy rain, and wind. By Monday morning, the storm had passed, leaving the trails muddy and slick. Search teams worried that if David and Sarah had been caught in the storm without proper shelter, hypothermia could have set in quickly. David and Sarah's families arrived by midweek. Sarah's parents drove up from Oregon. David's mother flew in from California. They stayed at a motel near the park entrance, spending their days at the ranger station, waiting for updates, pleading with coordinators to keep searching. After 10 days, the active search was scaled back. Rangers had covered hundreds of square miles. They'd used helicopters with thermal imaging, drones, and ground teams. Nothing. The case remained open, but resources were limited. Other emergencies demanded attention. Investigators began considering alternative theories. Could they have decided to disappear? It seemed unlikely. Both had stable jobs, loving families, and no apparent problems. Their bank accounts showed no unusual activity. Neither had withdrawn large amounts of cash before the trip. Could it have been an accident? The terrain was dangerous. A fall, a drowning, a sudden medical emergency. Any of these could explain the disappearance. But experienced search teams had combed the most dangerous sections of the trail. If there had been an accident, they should have found something. A body, gear, signs of a struggle. Could foul play have been involved? It was the least likely scenario in such a remote area, but not impossible. The park sees thousands of visitors each year. Most are there for nature and solitude, but occasionally, someone with darker intentions wanders into the wilderness. A month after the disappearance, David and Sarah's families organized a private search. Volunteers, many of them friends and co-workers, spent weekends combing the forest. They found nothing. By winter, snow blanketed the mountains. Any remaining traces were buried under feet of powder. The search ended. David and Sarah's families never gave up hope. Every spring, when the snow melted, they returned to the park. They walked the trails, put up flyers, talked to rangers and hikers. They created a website with photos and details about the disappearance, hoping someone, somewhere, might have seen something. The case was featured on a few true crime podcasts and local news segments. Tips came in occasionally. Someone thought they'd seen a couple matching their description in Montana. Another claimed to have found a backpack with initials carved into it, but none led anywhere. David's roommate eventually moved out of their apartment. He couldn't stand living there, surrounded by David's things, waiting for a knock on the door that never came. Sarah's hospital held a memorial service, though without bodies. It felt incomplete. Her colleagues planted a tree in the hospital garden in her honor. Years passed. 2014, 2015, 2016. The trail continued to attract hikers. Rangers led guided tours. Families camped at the same sites where David and Sarah might have stopped. Life went on. The forest kept its secrets. September 2022 began unusually dry. Forest fire risk was high across Washington state. The National Park Service hired additional forestry workers to monitor the backcountry and clear brush that could fuel potential fires. Marcus Webb, a 35-year-old forestry technician, was assigned to the Ross Lake area. He'd worked for the Park Service for 8 years and knew the terrain well. His job was to assess fire risk in remote sections of the park and report back on conditions. On September 19th, Marcus was working in a particularly dense section of forest about 2 miles off the main Copper Ridge Trail. He was documenting old-growth trees and checking for deadfall when he noticed something unusual through the underbrush. The remains of an old stone foundation, nearly hidden by vegetation. These kinds of structures aren't uncommon in the North Cascades. In the early 1900s, miners and trappers built cabins and shelters throughout these mountains. Most have long since collapsed, leaving only partial walls and foundations. Marcus approached the ruins. 3 walls of stacked stone still stood, about 4 feet high. The roof had collapsed decades ago, leaving a jumble of rotting timbers and moss. The interior was choked with ferns, brambles, and small saplings. As he stepped over the threshold, his boot sank into the ground. The earth here was softer than the surrounding soil, darker. He crouched down and noticed the ground had an uneven quality, as if it had been disturbed and then settled. Marcus had training in wilderness forensics. Part of his job involved recognizing signs of illegal activity, including clandestine graves used by wildlife poachers. Something about this spot raised his suspicions. He took out a folding shovel from his pack and carefully scraped away the top layer of soil. About 6 inches down, his shovel hit something that wasn't dirt. He cleared more soil away with his hands. Canvas fabric, old and rotting, partially disintegrated. He pulled at the edge. Beneath the canvas, a human skull stared back at him. Marcus recoiled, his heart pounding. He took several deep breaths, steadied himself, and pulled out his radio. He was too deep in the forest for cell service, but park ranger frequencies reached most areas. "Base, this is Webb. I've found human remains, requesting immediate assistance," the ranger station responded within minutes. Marcus provided his GPS coordinates and was told to stay at the location. A team would be dispatched immediately. 2 hours later, 3 park rangers arrived. They examined the site and confirmed the discovery. One of them carefully pulled back more of the canvas tarp. 2 skeletons lay beneath, side by side. One appeared to be male, the other female, based on bone structure and size. The female skeleton lay curled on her side, knees drawn up. The male skeleton lay on its back, arms crossed over the chest, as if arranged that way deliberately. Fragments of clothing clung to the bones, synthetic fabric from a jacket, denim from jeans, the rubber soles of hiking boots. The rangers cordoned off the area and called the county sheriff's office. By evening, investigators and a forensic team had arrived. They worked carefully, photographing everything before disturbing the site. Several items were found near the bodies: a broken compass, a water bottle with a faded label, the metal frame of a backpack, and a carabiner with a piece of climbing rope still attached. Most significantly, they found a driver's license in a plastic sleeve, partially preserved. The photo was faded but readable. The name, David Chen. The remains were carefully excavated and transported to the county morgue. The forensic examination began immediately. The medical examiner determined the bodies had been in the ground for approximately 9 years, consistent with the time frame of David and Sarah's disappearance. The male skeleton matched David's height and age. The female matched Sarah's. Both skulls showed evidence of trauma. David's skull had a fracture at the base, consistent with a blow from behind. Sarah's skull showed a similar fracture on the right side. The injuries suggested they had been struck with a heavy object. Additionally, several of David's ribs showed cut marks, thin, straight lines consistent with a knife blade. His left forearm showed a defensive fracture, the kind that occurs when someone raises their arm to block an attack. DNA samples were taken and compared with samples from the families. Within a week, the results confirmed what investigators already suspected. The remains were David Chen and Sarah Mitchell. Detectives reopened the case files from 2013. They reviewed search reports, interviewed rangers who had been involved in the original search, and re-examined evidence from the trailhead. One detail stood out. During the original investigation, a ranger had noted seeing a man camping in the Silvertip Basin area around the time of the disappearance. The man had been alone, acting strangely, and had packed up and left quickly when approached. The ranger hadn't thought much of it at the time. Solo hikers behave oddly sometimes. But he'd made a note of it in his report. The man had given his name as Ray Thomas and showed a wilderness permit, which checked out. But the permit had been issued to a Ray Thomas from Spokane. Detectives tracked down that Ray Thomas. He was 68 years old and hadn't been hiking in years due to a hip replacement. Someone had used his identity. Detectives began searching through records of people known to frequent the North Cascades backcountry. One name appeared multiple times in incident reports: Leonard Pike, 52, a former logger who lived in a remote cabin near Marble Mount. about 30 miles from the park entrance. Pike had a history. In 2010, he'd been questioned in connection with a series of thefts from campsites. Hikers reported missing food, gear, and personal items. Pike was a suspect, but was never charged due to lack of evidence. In 2012, a hiker reported being threatened by a man matching Pike's description. The hiker said the man appeared suddenly on a remote trail, told him he was trespassing on his land, and brandished a knife. The hiker fled and reported the incident, but by the time rangers investigated, the man was gone. Detectives drove to Pike's cabin. It was a ramshackle structure surrounded by stacks of firewood, rusted tools, and piles of debris. Pike answered the door. He was tall, gaunt, with long gray hair and a tangled beard. He looked at the detectives with suspicion. They explained they were investigating a murder case. Pike's expression didn't change. He asked if they had a warrant. They didn't. He told them to leave. Detectives obtained a search warrant the next day. When they returned, Pike was gone. The cabin was empty, but he'd left in a hurry. Drawers were open, belongings scattered. In a back room, investigators found something chilling. A collection of items that didn't belong to Pike. There were backpacks, water bottles, hiking poles, and jackets. Dozens of them, piled in corners and stuffed into plastic bins. Many had names written on tags or stitched into the FA. Investigators recognized some of the names from unsolved missing persons cases in the region. In one bin, they found a journal. Pike had kept detailed records of his encounters with hikers. The entries were brief, cryptic, but disturbing. One entry from September 2013 read, "2 on the ridge. Following. They don't belong. Fix it." A few pages later, "Stonehouse. Quiet now. Covered. Safe." Investigators issued a warrant for Pike's arrest. A manhunt began. Tips came in from across the state. Someone reported seeing him at a gas station in eastern Washington. Another claimed he was camping in the Olympics. None of the sightings were confirmed. 3 weeks later, a hunter found Pike's body in the woods near the Canadian border. He'd been dead for several days. The cause of death was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. A rifle lay beside him. There was no note. With Pike dead, detectives pieced together what likely happened using the evidence they'd gathered. On the evening of September 13, 2013, David and Sarah had been making their way along the Copper Ridge Trail. As darkness fell and the weather turned, they decided to seek shelter. They spotted the old stone foundation off the trail and made their way toward it. Leonard Pike had been camping in the area. He considered the backcountry his territory and resented the presence of other hikers. When he saw David and Sarah approaching his shelter, something in his mind snapped. He confronted them. An argument ensued. Pike attacked. David tried to defend Sarah and himself, but Pike was armed with a knife and a heavy rock or club. Both were killed quickly. Pike buried them on the spot, under the floor of the stone foundation, covered them with an old tarp, and concealed the grave with soil and debris. He took their backpacks, phones, and gear, either as trophies or to prevent discovery. Over the following days, as search teams combed the area, Pike watched from a distance. He knew where the bodies were. He knew they wouldn't be found. The journal entries suggested Pike had done this before. Investigators began cross-referencing the items found in his cabin with missing persons cases. Over the next year, they identified at least 6 other hikers who had disappeared in the North Cascades over the previous decade. Some of their belongings were found in Pike's cabin. The cases remain under investigation. David and Sarah's families finally had answers, though not the kind they'd hoped for. Sarah's parents held a funeral. David's mother gave a eulogy, her voice breaking as she talked about her son's kindness, his love for the outdoors, his plans for the future. They were buried together in a cemetery in Seattle. The headstone reads, "David Chen and Sarah Mitchell, forever exploring." Marcus Webb, the forestry worker who found the remains, continued his work in the park, though he requested a transfer to a different area. He couldn't bring himself to return to that part of the forest. The old stone foundation was left standing, but the Park Service installed a small memorial plaque nearby. It doesn't mention the murders, only that 2 hikers lost their lives in the area. The exact location of the grave is not disclosed to the public. The North Cascades remain as beautiful and dangerous as ever. Hikers still walk the trails, camp under the stars, and marvel at the mountains. Most never know the stories hidden in the forest. The trail continues, the mountains stand silent, and the wilderness keeps its secrets until it doesn't.